Hello everyone, this is Sudhakar. Welcome to my troubleshooting and debugging channel. In our previous tutorial, we have learned how to create a GitHub action pipeline for deploying infrastructure into AWS by using Terraform. In a previous tutorial, we have learned this GitHub action because we thought like if in case our version control system is GitHub, so we thought to utilize GitHub actions itself for CI/CD pipeline deployments. But today tutorial, we are going to assume, let's say you are using Bitbucket as a version control system. Maybe for some reasons, your organization has chosen Bitbucket, maybe in a cost-effective manner or some sponsorships. It can be anything. But if in case your version control system is Bitbucket, then how you can write a pipeline or how you can utilize Bitbucket itself for running CI/CD pipeline for the similar infrastructure deployment using Terraform in AWS. So that is our today's demo. Without further delay, let's get started. So let's assume you are a developer and you are writing some Terraform code for creating an infrastructure. So what will happen is similar to our GitHub Actions. Bitbucket also has a concept called pipeline. So Bitbucket providing this pipeline concept where you can write a set of steps to execute Terraform commands or any scripts, whichever you want to execute as a form of CI/CD pipeline steps. That that can be defined based on either the pull request or if someone has pushed or made some code into a particular branch, you want to trigger the pipeline. That can be achieved in Bitbucket pipeline as well. So we will see how we can create a Bitbucket pipeline in this particular demo. Let me go back to my Bitbucket repository so that I can show you how to create a Bitbucket pipeline. So I'm going to create an empty repository in my Bitbucket account. So I logged into my Bitbucket account and I'm just giving a demo name like a repository name like demo Bitbucket pipeline. So it is I'm just leaving the remaining options as it is. And here my default branch would be master. And I wanted to include a git ignore file as well. That's it. So let's create the repository. Once repository created, so here repository got created. I want to clone this repository into my Visual Studio Code. Let me go back to my Visual Studio here. So I'm executing this clone command. That's it. So I just cloned my repository, demo Bitbucket pipeline. Currently it is empty. There are no files exist. And I'm not going to write anything new. I'm just going to copy the Terraform files, which we have created in our previous tutorial in GitHub Action. So I'm just copying only the Terraform files. So the backend file, the main file, the provider file, and then variable file. So I'm just copying these 4 files into this Bitbucket repository as well. So I will just open the files and I will show you what exactly the files are. In a backend.tf file, as you remember, this is the bucket name which I created. So I'm not going to touch anything. I'm going to use the same bucket for my Terraform backend. This is just a name. It's just a bucket name. And this bucket is going to store my Terraform state file. That would be all it is doing, nothing else. In my main.tf file, I'm just getting the AMI, Ubuntu latest AMI, and then I'm just creating a AWS instance. So here I don't want to make the first and complicate. So I'm just hard coding the instance type. It's like a Tato media. As we make a progress, I will show you how you can parameterize and variabilize this Terraform in a Bitbucket pipeline as well. I will explain you that. In provider.tf file, you can see it's a provider, just AWS provider. We're setting the region. And in the variable, I think right now this is not required. We are not using it anyway, but we will use it in a moment. So these are all the files which I have right now. Let me show you. These are the 4 files, and I'm going to run a Terraform init in this my console. So just wanted to show you whether I'm able to connect or not. So here I'm getting some error, invalid credentials. That's expected because we are dealing with AWS account and it required AWS credentials to be configured. I will take a pass and I will gonna grab my credentials, AWS credentials. I'm gonna configure my AWS credentials in this terminal so that I should be able to execute Terraform command. Let me take a break and I will come back. Okay, I'm back. So I have configured my AWS credentials in this particular terminal by using AWS configure command. So I'm not executing anything here, but I'm going to execute my Terraform init command again here. So Terraform init. So you should be able to see that Terraform successfully initialized. Yes, exactly. Terraform has been initialized successfully. Now let me try for Terraform plan. So Terraform plan will show you what exactly the resources we're going to create in AWS environment. So here you can see one to add, which is nothing but our EC2 instance. So here I'm going to deploy AWS instance called web resource. So that's exactly I'm doing here. And you can see now I have configured credentials and my initial playbooks already. My so my Terraform code is ready. And from my local terminal, I could be able to see that it's all going well. Even I can try to apply Terraform apply. So when I execute Terraform apply, it will try to create an instance in the AWS account. Let's see if it is creating really or not. I'm going back to my AWS console EC2. Here it's still not started, I think. So here it's still pending. So it just now started creating the instance and it's still creating. That means from my local terminal, I could able to run the Terraform command, and my Terraform is able to connect to the AWS account, and it is creating the instance. Now, the same steps, whatever I'm running Terraform commands in my local terminal, I'm going to execute the same commands via Bitbucket pipeline. Now let's go back to my Bitbucket account, and I want to show you how to enable a Bitbucket pipeline. So in my Bitbucket repository, you can see there is an option called pipelines. When you click on these pipelines, but here if you see create your first pipeline, click on here, and it is providing you or it is showing you multiple options. These are like templates, so you can choose whatever the template you want, or you can write your own pipeline as well. As we are going to deal with Terraform, I want to choose Terraform template so that it will make us our life a little easier to understand how you can write the Terraform Bitbucket pipeline. So it will give you some overview or a template. So here you can see manage infrastructure Terraform. This is the option we want to choose. So let me select this option here. And if you see when I select that option, it is by default populating some content inside the Bitbucket pipeline. And you can see here the name of the file is bitbucket-pipelines.aml. So this is the file we want. So here you can see some pipelines, and it is using HashiCorp Terraform image itself. And inside the pipelines, it's called default. And inside the default, there are parallel steps are there. The parallel steps are nothing but it is doing something called Terraform init and Terraform validate and some security scanning as well. So basically, irrespective of branch, irrespective of branch, when we commit anything to this particular repository, these two steps will run parallel. So that what it is doing, it is just validating if we have written Terraform file, it is just trying to validate the Terraform code. And the second step, what it is doing is a security scan. So by using Atlassian Git secret scan image, it is trying to run some security scan against our repository. For now, I think we don't need these two things. So I'm going to delete this. We will make it simple. The next thing is under pipelines, we have branches. So as I was showing you here, the branch, this is the one I wanted to choose because when I commit to the master branch only, I want to run a pipeline. So that's why we have specified the master branch. And inside the master branch, I have these steps. Again, here some security scan is happening. And then the second step is deploy to production. So here there are a lot of parameters are passing here. You can see the name of the step and the deployment type is a production or staging or test, and trigger type manual. So we will talk about each line in a bit. So right now I'm deleting this security scan thing. We don't need it right now, but we will come back and add it in a bit again. So here this is my pipeline and branches and a master. Inside that master I have one step. Something wrong here. So let me keep it as it is, and let's see why it is giving the error. But we will try to find out the root cause. So I really should accept this step pipeline can't be manually triggered. So some problem is there with this manual command, I think. So I'm not going to use that manual thing for now, but I will explain you what that manual thing will do. So our deployment would be staging. Let me change it to staging. And inside of staging, I wanted to run Terraform init, Terraform plan, and Terraform apply. So if you remember, the same commands I ran on my local terminal as well. So the same commands I'm going to execute via Bitbucket pipeline. So this is as simple as a simple pipeline script. So you can see I'm just executing three Terraform commands, and then I'm just trying to uh, run this pipeline when someone commit the code into master branch. That's all I'm doing. So let me commit this file. So I'm just committing directly the file into a Bitbucket repository. And as when I commit this code or commit that file, you can see here the pipeline got started. So the pipeline immediately triggered because of master branch. So this is the initial commit I'm doing. So somehow something went wrong. So no configuration files. So we will see why this is coming. First of all, this file is committed into my remote repository directly, but this is not in the local. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this file name, or I will pull this file into my local. So I have added these files, but if you remember, these files are still in my local. I did not commit the files into remote repository. That's the problem. So let me pull that file, git pull origin master. So I'm getting that file, Bitbucket file, into my local now. So you can see this is the file. And now I'm going to commit all the files together. So git status. I don't want to commit Terraform related stuff. So I will copy that git ignore file from my previous repo. So here, these two things I don't want to commit. So I'm adding that files here. If you see git status again, now you can see here. So only these four Terraform files and git ignore file I'm going to commit. Git add, git commit. This is my first commit. So let's naming it like first commit. And git push into master branch. So when I push the code into master branch, now you should be able to see one more pipeline is running. So here you go. So you can see here the pipeline in progress. Here you can see the pipeline name deploy to staging. That is the name we have specified. Now, if you remember, when I execute the Terraform commands inside my CLI, I have configured my AWS credentials. Now we need to configure those AWS credentials in order to specify this pipeline can understand which credential it can use. So right now, if you see, it is failing because no valid credentials for S3 backend source. Now we need to configure uh, our AWS credentials in a Bitbucket repository. Let's see how you can configure them. Here in a repository, you see here there is an option called repository settings. Now click on this repository settings, and inside this repository settings, in the same left navigation bar, if you scroll down, there is an option called pipelines. So if you see here, there's an option called pipelines. Uh, I think one step I wanted to tell you before moving further, if in case if you do not get a pipeline option enabled by default, so you need to make sure you enable this enable pipelines. By default, sometimes it might be disabled. So you need to be very careful that you enable this option. Then only you can run the Bitbucket pipelines. For me, the repository, when I create the repository, it enabled because it seems like my account level, the pipelines is already enabled. That's why it's enabled. But if in case you come across your pipeline is not enabled, do click on this enable button. Now under this pipeline, as I was telling, we need to configure AWS credentials and all. So go to this repository variables under pipeline. And here you need to configure AWS credentials. You see here, environment variables added on the repository level can be accessed by any user with push permissions. To access a variable, put $symbol in front of its name. For example, access AWS secret by using $AWS secret. That's exactly we need to configure here. So it should be somewhere here. We can provide the parameter access environment variables. So Bitbucket AWS credentials environment variables. So I think this is what I'm looking for. So you can see here AWS access key ID and AWS secret access key. So these are the two parameters which I'm going to configure in my Bitbucket repository variable section. So here AWS access key ID and here the corresponding value, and it is a secured. So make sure you configure this secured. Otherwise, any user who has access to this repository can see the credentials. So just be aware that you click on this secured always for these credentials. Click on add, and the second one is AWS secret access key. And here I will type my value. Click on add. So now I have configured these two credentials. Now our pipeline section here. Now we have added AWS access key and secret key. So those variables will be passed as the environment variables to our pipeline. Let's go back and run the pipeline again and see if it is going to pick up the credentials or not. So I'm choosing here the branch and the pipeline is the master pipeline. Click on run. So here it is trying to deploy to staging again. So the pipeline step started, and it's gonna take a few seconds to trigger the pipeline because it is doing some background checks in the Bitbucket pipeline. So here it is failing because I configured my AWS credentials, but I did not configure actual values here. So let me again take a short break and I will configure my AWS credentials. Okay, I'm back. So I have configured my actual access key and secret key inside this repository setting and repository variables. Now I'm coming back to here, run pipeline, select the branch and pick up the pipeline, and here you go. So I'm just executing the pipeline again. Let's see if it is going to pick up my AWS credentials. So it seems just now cloning the repository, sorry, the Terraform image. Now it's success. So you can see here initializing the backend, successfully configured my S3 backend, and Terraform has been successfully initialized. Awesome. So that means my repository variables, which I have configured, are picked up by the pipeline. You might be getting some doubt where exactly I'm passing those variables in a Bitbucket pipeline. Actually, I'm not passing them inside the Bitbucket pipeline. The reason is there are some certain parameters or repository variables which will be auto pick up by Bitbucket pipeline, but not all the variables will be picked up. Let's say I want to pass some random value, like I want to pass the project name, I want to pass some branch name in a variable, repository variable. Those kind of parameters you need to use, as they mentioned, dollar some project. So let's say I have configured my repository variable here under pipeline repository variable, and for example I name it like a project. So project is demo something demo. So I click on add here. So when I have this project, in order to read that, I must mention it here so that I can get that value printed here. These kind of variables I need to specify inside the Bitbucket, but these AWS credentials and all, they can still exist in the backend like an environment variable. So those will be loaded as an environment variable, and Bitbucket pipeline can understand those AWS secrets which are stored in the environment variable, and it still can connect to the backend AWS as well. So that's why I did not specify the AWS credentials here, or else you can provide them here like something in a step. I can do something like here, export dollar AWS access key ID. So this is also fine. This is also absolutely fine. This is also you can specify something like this. So AWS access key ID equal to a dollar AWS access key ID, and similarly for secret access key as well. But this is not necessary in case of these AWS credentials, because the pipeline can understand by default those environment variables. That's why we are not specifying them explicitly. But whereas this project, we it is inside the environment variable still, but in order to read that value, because we wanted to physically or visually want to see that change, that's why we are specifying this particular variable here. Hope you understand what we are trying to do here. And so far we have seen how to create our Bitbucket pipeline, how to enable Bitbucket pipeline in a Bitbucket repository, and how to configure AWS access key and secret key and all. Now, uh, so far we haven't configured any variables. Let's say you want to have more control on your pipeline, where you want to select multiple parameters as input parameters. Let's say you want to specify which action you want to perform, whether apply action or destroy action. You want to choose which region you want to deploy EC2 instance. So these are called like input variables. So when you want to specify any input variables, how you can configure them in the Bitbucket pipeline. So that we will see now. So in Bitbucket, there is a concept called custom. So let's say when I say custom, it is not tied to any branch. That's how the Bitbucket pipeline will work in order to pass the parameter. So let me find out that passing parameters for in Bitbucket pipeline. So how to parameterize the pipeline. So you can see here, I was telling you, right, the custom. So the problem in the Bitbucket is when you want to pass the parameters, it cannot be tied to any branch. It should always be custom. That's how the Bitbucket pipeline is defined. Inside a custom, you can have some name. That name that name contains the variables and the corresponding steps as well. So let me maybe it is little difficult to understand the first term, but once you start writing the pipeline, you will understand what exactly it means. Back to my Bitbucket pipeline here. So now under pipelines, as it is mentioned, custom. So I'm just changing it to custom. Inside custom, so it could be any name. So I can say it like a staging because this is my staging pipeline. So this is staging. Inside staging, now here you can specify variables. Let's say I want to configure variables. Instance type. So as you remember, we have instance type, right? So you can configure instance type. So here, my variable name would be instance type. And I can specify a default value for it. The default value would be some T3 medium. And here I can specify allowed values. So my allowed values would be some T3 dot medium. That is the one which I have default. And then T3 micro. And then T2 small, something like that. So I have specified three actions. So three allowed values. Now I want to configure one more variable, name like action. So what action you want to perform, whether the apply action or destroy action. So name, and inside the name default option, default action would be apply. And here again allowed values. The first one would be apply and second one would be destroy. Now we have configured successfully our variables. Once you configure the variable, the next step would be the step. So here I would say instead of staging, deployment. So here the first step would be deploy to staging, and these are all my parameters. So as I have specified the parameter, now as you know, we need to pass the parameters to Terraform commands by using variable section. So here instance underscore type equal to my instance type variable. So here I'm passing this variable, and the same I need to pass for apply command as well. So this is exactly we can configure the input variables. Now I need to update my variable. So now I need to enable this one. So this is the variable I'm taking inside the Bitbucket pipeline. So instance type. Now I need to configure the instance type as a variable here in my Terraform main file. So here is a var.instance type. Now basically, if you understand this, so from Bitbucket, I'm going to select the instance type and action, and that value will be passed into my main.tf as a variable. And here, based on the user input, the instance will be created. And also one thing I need to update here, which is nothing but action. So here, if you see here, currently I'm executing apply, but here I wanted to perform destroy. So you can specify this one option as this is also as a input variable. Terraform action would be input, auto approve, and the variable also as an input. I think that's all. So we have configured the input variables. Let's test it out. So let me commit the files, git status, git add, git commit, added input variables, git push to master branch. As you know, once you push the code to master branch, the pipeline would trigger. Let's go back to the pipeline and see whether the pipeline got triggered or not. Go to pipelines and let's see if the pipeline is started. We committed, but pipeline seems still not started. Let's wait for some more time. Okay, wait, I forgot to mention. Now we have deleted that branch, right? That's why it's not triggering. So when you specify this custom, that means we are not specifying any branch, and we don't want to start a pipeline by default. You always want to trigger a pipeline by passing the parameters. That's exactly what we configured. Now, You go to our pipelines option here, and here you click on run pipeline. There you need to specify which branch you want to pick up, and then you need to specify the custom. So it seems like our pipeline file is something wrong. So there is an error in your Bitbucket pipeline at pipeline custom deployment 0. So it seems it is not aligned properly. Let's go back here and see. So here it seems like it lists variables inside a variables. So it is under, yeah, it seems correct only. Let's see if that is the mistake. So it is actually a plural, not a singular. Let's go back and refresh the page again and click on run pipeline, select the master. Yeah, exactly. Now that's the problem. So it's a plural, not a singular variable. So it's a variables. Now you can see once you select the custom deployment, so it is asking you to provide an input variable called instance type and action. So now let's say I want to change T to small and click on apply, run. If you remember earlier, I have executed that pipeline, and earlier it was T to medium. Now we have chosen T to small. So you should expect that the pipeline should trigger, and it should detect the change, and it should be able to reconfigure the instance with the T to small. So here you can see Terraform has been initialized successfully and the plan has been run. And if you see here, the action is parameterized, and it actually understands apply action. And the instance type is parameterized, and you can see T2 small is the one which we have selected. And it actually detected that change, and it is trying to change that instance to T2 small. So you should be able to see, so it is currently trying to stop the existing instance so that it will create the new one. But overall, so our input variables has pick up, and it is trying to create an instance, and it is trying to update the existing instance with the latest provided value. So far, I think you have understand how to create the pipeline, and how now we understand how to pass the parameters. Now I want to recall one option which we have deleted in the beginning of this demo. That is a manual trigger. So if you remember, the trigger is manual. That option is there. Now let's try to understand what that action actually is. So let's say you have written a Terraform code and you wanted to deploy the Terraform code into staging environment first. Once you deploy the code into staging environment, you will cross check whether the infrastructure which you have created is working fine or not, whether the application which is running inside that infrastructure is working fine or not. Once you get the confirmation, and once the setup is working properly in staging, you want to promote the same code into production so that the same infrastructure will be created into production environment as well. All right. That's exactly where this manual trigger will help us. Now, let me come back here into my Bitbucket pipeline, and I will try to add one more step, which is called deployment to production. So I will name it like a deploy to production. And this deployment is production deployment. Now here, I will include the trigger manual option. So when I specify trigger manual, let's see how exactly it is behaving inside a Bitbucket pipeline. I'm going to commit this code to see what will happen inside the pipeline. Prod deployment and merge to master branch. Now I'll go back to pipelines, run the pipeline, select the master branch. In master branch here, I have a custom deployment, and the same thing I'm going to apply here. So T3 medium, but no. So I don't want to change anything for staging. So my previous instance type is T2 small, so I'm trying to apply the same. Run. Now you can see here the two steps are populated. So if you remember, our first step is deploy to staging. Our second step is deploy to production. So those two steps are coming here. Now the first step is executing deploy to staging. So here it is trying to do the planning. Init is success. Planning also should not detect anything because we haven't changed anything. So you can see no changes. And Terraform apply also completed. So now you can see here, deploy to staging is completed. But when you observe, deploy to production is waiting, because that is where the trigger manual coming into picture. So here it is waiting for a manual intervention to click on deploy option. So how exactly it is useful is, when you deploy the code into your Terraform code into a staging environment, I will go back here and I will see whether my instance is successfully executed and running fine. And also, if in case any application is running inside this application, inside this instance, I will cross verify, okay, my application is working fine or not. Once I test my entire staging environment, or when I run the sanity on the staging environment, and if I get the result is success, then I will come here and I will click on the deploy button, so that the same Terraform code will be deployed into production environment as well. So in this particular case, it is better. I mean, if you are using the same AWS credentials and the same AWS account, absolutely fine. You don't need to specify any extra credentials. But if in case your account is different for production, then it is obviously better to pass the production AWS credentials here. So you might have configured different credentials in a repository variable section under pipeline in a Bitbucket repository. So you can configure here AWS access key ID, and I will read this value something like AWS or prod AWS access key ID. So I would have configured my prod credentials to understand easily something like this. Similarly, if it is for staging, I would have configured here export. I would say like staging or STG. So I can configure STG AWS credentials inside my repository. I can read something like this. So when it is executing the staging step, it will use these credentials. So the corresponding AWS account will be connected, and it will deploy the staging infrastructure in this particular account. When it comes to production, again, it will pick up the different credentials for different ID. Then it will try to deploy the infrastructure into a different AWS account. So this is how you can differentiate the credentials if it is a different AWS accounts. But if it is the same account, the same credentials, you no need to specify. But if you see here, when we are trying to deploy into production, so it is showing you what exactly the commits are going into production and what is the difference you're adding inside the code. So currently I just made the change in this only file. That's why it is showing only this file. Otherwise, if you have made any Terraform code changes, that also will be coming here. You can see what changes are going into production. Once you're okay with this all changes, you are perfectly all right, then click on deploy. So once you click on deploy, it will again start the steps which are mentioned inside the production deployment. So these scripts will be executed now. So that's exactly happening here. That is where this manual trigger will come into picture. So this is very useful, a nice feature in Bitbucket pipeline, where you can perform different environment deployments in a single pipeline, where you have more control on the deployments in case of Bitbucket pipeline. So here you can see my production deployment also completed. As I'm using the same backend file for production, that's why I don't see any changes here. Ideally, you will use a parameterized state file for this kind of deployments. I mean to say, when you are trying to deploy into a different environment, obviously you need to maintain different state file so that each will be written into a different state files. I think this is the overall picture. I believe you understand the overall picture of how you can create a Bitbucket pipeline if in case of your version control system is a Bitbucket. In this case, you don't need to set up a separate pipeline, a CI/CD pipeline like a Jenkins and all. You don't need to do that because Bitbucket itself is providing a nice feature called pipeline, where you have more control on deploying your infrastructure into multiple environments in a single pipeline. And also it is giving you a provision by passing the parameters or variables. And also it is providing you more flexibility in choosing these variables and from which branch you wanted to deploy the setup or infrastructure. So everything you have control over in your pipeline. I think that's all for this session. I believe you understand how you can create your Bitbucket pipeline and how you can create the infrastructure in AWS by using Terraform and Bitbucket. That's all for this session. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you.